why don't we repeal the statute that you mentioned and go back to allow states to have multi-member districts? Then we could solve all the problems that you're raising about drawing district lines, and we could have maybe proportional representation and cumulative voting to protect rights of minorities. What do you think about that?
If you were to revert back to a multi-member district, then all of the people in the state would not be represented, because you'd have maybe a more heavy representation. Let's take Florida again. You'd have more heavy representation from people from South Florida that are more connected to their neighbors in South Florida than they are from either Central Florida or in the Panhandle.
The issues of gerrymandering and malapportionment may be more aptly solved by the boundary commissions that are evident in the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada, in which it's a nonpartisan organization that establishes district lines.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, that was a very fine presentation, but I think I'm going to let one of my colleagues start.
All right.
I'll finish up since I'm presenting.
Florida, you're well coached, and you did a fine job of addressing a very complicated question. Sophia, I liked starting out with the faithful echo. I don't know, I like that. I'm going to hang on to that one. Talking about the size of the constituency, 1 per 600,000, far cry from the 1 per 30,000, and potentially we could have 10,000 members of Congress today if we kept that same ratio. But I like the idea you talk about, you bring up the vote of no confidence, what it means to be a lame duck, how that can affect the idea of packing in terms of the minorities. Miller versus Johnson, you went beyond Shaw versus Reno and showed another complexity. That issue took almost 10 years to solve, and by that time it was time to reapportion with new census. Carolina, I liked your discussion of the disadvantages and advantages of the various systems. You brought in about the cabinet. I like that. The role the cabinet plays in terms of the prime minister. The question that you were asked, and you were the one that took it on about self-interest. That was a tough one to handle for anybody. I think you did well on that. And then you brought up some recent stuff, current British elections coming up, and how they're moving towards, there's some things that are similar to what we're doing. Adriana, I like your discussion again of Shaw versus Reno, the waters of bitterness. I love those quotations. I like the fact you brought up a specific example in Florida, the 16th district. I thought that was very good. You also talked about the role of impeachment. I thought that was critical to bring that up. What I was trying to bring up with Gomillion versus Lightfoot was that the original case that starts this was a case actually out of Illinois called Cole Grove versus Green, where the Supreme Court ruled that questions of redistricting is and the 14th Amendment is a political question, not judicial. And finally, when we get to the Gomillion versus Lightfoot, the justice who wrote the original decision, Justice Frankfurter, was in a box. He had already said the 14th Amendment is not justiciable in regard to political gerrymandering, so he had to use the 15th Amendment in regard to racial discrimination. So when we get to Shaw versus Reno, the question is, do you want to use the 15th Amendment, which many people think you could have used, but you were correct. They used the 14th, and it was equal protection. It shows how complex this whole thing is. I think you guys did a very fine job. You're very good researchers. You were able to make some very compelling points. You're well coached, and you have every right to be proud of yourself. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I agree with my colleague. It was a really lovely job. I enjoyed several things you're talking. I'm not sure if I understood you correctly, but you said you thought that the Prime Minister has more power than the President, which was an interesting angle, and you may well be right. I like very much the pen of partisanship to draw the districts, so that's why we came back to that point. You did very well with the self-interest issue. I appreciated that. It was sort of an obvious answer to you, wasn't it, to just say, well, then he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. I'd just like to take a second, if I can. I know that Mr. Ansel will probably have very detailed comments to make as well, but I'd like you to look around this room and think to yourselves of what small group of people you find yourselves in. If this is the Judiciary Committee and you're sitting giving testimony with a very small number of people who've ever risen to the level of being able to do so. And perhaps you might find yourself back here one day, because you certainly have shown that you have the same intellectual power that might get you to be a judge. And if not, I hope you would consider being representatives for the rest of us. And if not, I'm certain that you will be exquisite citizens and stand us in good stead. So thank you very much. You did a really lovely job.
Thank you.
You're all strong as a team and as individuals as well. And your presentation, and also in answer to some of my questions, you really think that not only is divided government a good thing, but that people all over the world want divided government. I guess they think that not getting anything done sometimes is a good thing. And then you drew the distinctions with the way members are assigned to districts between here and the parliamentary system with strategic appointments. That's not something others have talked to us about today. And also an advantage that we haven't heard anyone say, which I thought was very interesting about having the fusion of the two powers, is that the legislation is enforced as it's intended, which certainly can be an issue in our system. And you recognize that there's less deliberation with the parliamentary system. Also an interesting point is that the only path to executive office is through the legislature in the British system. And of course, many of our presidents have been governors and have gotten that experience before. Certainly, there's a much wider range of people. I know when I met Prime Minister Heath one time, he said, yes, and all of us became Prime Minister, we all lived across the hall from each other in Cambridge. And here you can get a peanut farmer, and then a few years later can be governor. That is one of the differences in our system, and other people haven't really talked about it. And I think your reference to, as was mentioned, about eliminating lame duck is an advantage of their system. There were a couple things that you said I think are somewhat controversial. So besides the Prime Minister having more power. So just think about some of them a little bit. You said that in the British system, now that the candidates are more sending their wives out and they're debating and they're doing all these things, people know more about their platforms than they used to. I think most people would say there's less of a focus on the platforms now, and now there's more of a focus on personality. That's one of the reasons they've become more like us. When was the last time you heard anyone read the Democratic Party platform in this country when they vote for president? They watch the debates, but they're not really reading the platforms. And you also said that regardless of whatever money came in, there are 3 ways to vote, and the member's going to vote the same way regardless of how the money came in. My 10 years up here, that isn't always true. I'm sorry to say. I wish it were always true, but people aren't giving money because they think it's not going to have any effect on how people vote, and unfortunately sometimes it really does. I think it's hard to dispute that. And but those are relatively small points. I mean, you had a lot of original thought. You've obviously worked really hard. You were prepared for everything that came your way. You should feel great about how you did. It's clear why you're in the top 10. And thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.